about African American males.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I am Fred Bonner, and I have, so I'm trying to throw away the howdy since I'm in Jersey now, and you're absolutely right. So recently transitioned from Texas A&M University to Rutgers University into the Samuel B. Whit Proctor Endowed Chair. And this particular endowed chair, the reason I made the long voyage from Texas to Jersey is that Rutgers was looking for someone who was engaged in research looking at marginalized populations across the P20 spectrum. And so, looking across my research agenda, I had very much steeped myself in looking at issues impacting academically gifted African American males. And today, I'm going to just briefly share with you my impetus for studying this particular population and some of the work that I have done in an attempt to change the narrative. You know, one of the things that I noticed very early on when I was a doc student and moving through is that when you look at the literature on African American males, typically you hear things like African American males are not doing well, they're stopping out, they're dropping out, they're not being successful. But you know, I wanted to disrupt that narrative and to tell a very different story. Because all of this not doing well and not, that's not the stuff that I was accustomed to. You know, I graduated from a small town in East Texas, Jefferson High School, Jefferson, Texas. And I graduated in a small class, but the top 5% of my class went on to the University of North Texas, majored in chemistry, graduated from there with honors. And looking across and looking at some of my classmates, you know, there were other African American males and other African American females. My first summer at the University of North Texas, I actually went back to East Texas and I served as an intern for Eastman Kodak Chemical Company and worked there that entire summer as an intern, you know, kind of practicing my craft since I was going to become this chemist. And that particular summer, you know, one of my peers, one of my colleagues, Crystal Jones, she had just graduated the year before from Longview High School. She was the first African American to graduate as valedictorian from Longview High School. Crystal has gone on now. She finished her undergraduate degree at MIT. She got her PhD at Berkeley, and now she's a professor at MIT. So this whole narrative about African Americans are not, they can't do, they're stopping out, they're dropping out, you know, that was not what I knew. Those were not the folks that I knew, males or females. So my research and what I attempted to do was to start to move away in what Donna Ford calls moving from a deficit perspective, looking at more of an asset-based approach to looking at these populations. So with that said, you know, that has been kind of the cornerstone of why I have elected to focus on these populations. But let me just show you here a couple of, one of the first questions that I asked is looking at this particular slide and looking at these pictures. Looking at these pictures, I just have one question for you. So who's gifted? And I'm going to invoke a little bit of my Black Baptist church upbringing. So I'm going to ask you, since we don't have a lot of time, to turn to your neighbor and pose that very same question to your neighbor. So looking at these pictures, so who's gifted? Give you about a minute and a half. Okay, so what did your neighbor say? Someone throw something out there. What's your neighbor say?
All of them.
I hear all of them. What else? Anything else? All of them?
Depends on if you're asking by view or by fact. I mean, by view, if you're just going to stereotype, you can do that easily.
Very
But
good.
if you read factual information, which just for me, I read an article on Lil Wayne's up there at the top, and I know differently. But if I look at him, I don't want to say that if I didn't know who he was, I would say absolutely not. It's my
Absolutely.
stereotype.
And you get all the buzzwords, stereotype, and looking at looking at phenotypic characteristics, so and exactly what you said, not knowing, or seeing, this brother come into your classroom, with the tattoos or the dreads, for some people, the automatic assumption is that there's no way in the world that that individual would be gifted.
That's incorrect.
And that is incorrect. So I'm glad that the general consensus was that, all of them could be, and you're absolutely right about that. But the reason that I started with this slide, if you look at the literature, and some of the work of Ford and Grantham, some of the work that I've done, some of the work of Henfield, Ford has talked about three of the primary reasons that African American males go unidentified or under-identified. One is teacher nominations, and a lot of that comes from the very stuff that we just talked about here. Teacher nominations, standardized testing, and choice. It's not attractive, and we don't make it attractive, to be in gifted and talented programming. So looking at those three issues, just to move us forward, I took this from the, if you get an opportunity, just Google SHOT, and that is SCHOTT, Black Boys Report. Put in SHOT Black Boys Report. This is from the 2009 report. There's a more recent report that's up 2011. And basically what the SHOT Foundation does is that like every, I think it's 3 to 5 years, 3 years or so, they come out with a report that gives you kind of a snapshot of the nation and how black boys are doing in the nation. Particularly looking at some of the things like the NAP data, looking at mathematics and reading. They also look at KT, they look at special education. So when you look at, and the thing I like about the SHOT report is that when you Google and you get this map, each one of the states, you can click on it and it will pull up the data on black males. So it's an interactive map. So as you look here, you see the dark red states, it's kind of small, so I'll read it for you. The graduation rate for black males is below 50%. The light red states, the graduation rates between 50 and 59%. The light green states, graduation rate between 60 and 69%. And then the dark green states, the graduation rates above 70%. And one of the points that I used to make about the dark green states is, it's not a lot of brothers. Not a lot of brothers in North Dakota. Just saying. Yeah, so, and an outlier in that, and now because I'm in the state, I've been able to ask some very critical questions. New Jersey is one of the dark green states. And I was like, how did New Jersey fall in this? And from what I found, they had an initiative in the state of New Jersey where they really focused on low-income schools and very high concentration of minority populations, looking at these schools and school districts. And what they attempted to do was to create a more equitable situation as far as funding and as far as teacher preparation, all of the stuff and all of the accoutrements that you get in high-performing schools. New Jersey tried to do that and not only, did they just talk the talk, they walk the walk. They put funding behind it, they put policy behind it that actually drove that particular initiative. So, hence New Jersey, a dark green state. Here are a couple of facts and stats, anyway. And again, this came from the SHOT report. Yes, we can. The 2009 report, and as I stated, the 2011 report is actually out. But I find it striking. Only 47% of black males graduate from high school. And one of the points that they made is that we cannot become so affixed on the spotlight that we constructively ignore the 1.2 million we are losing each year. Now, that point that they made was basically to say, there are pockets and there are programs. There's something novel that's going on here in Kentucky for black males. Or there's something novel in New Jersey. There's something novel in Texas. But what they were saying is that, even though you have these novel, stars, but collectively, we still have a problem. One researcher even went on to say that for any other population, we would have declared this a state of emergency. And why have we not for black males? Losing 1.2 million each year. The rate at which black males are being pushed out of school and into the pipeline to prison far exceeds the rate at which they are graduating. Here I just included a little bit more about some of my research and looking at underachievement, underrepresentation. One of the statements that I made, when we look at a combination of the factors that are impacting this population, there are a number of issues, but I looked at deficit modeling, how we define giftedness. I also looked at issues of identity development. Also, there's a whole body of literature out there about generational challenges. What does it mean to be a millennial? And all of the stuff that goes on with millennials. Just published a book last year on diverse millennials in college, and I will tell you that a lot of the stuff that we say about millennials and all of that literature, when you start to look at millennials through cultural lenses, some of those characteristics are very different. Very, very different. And then also, this whole notion of stereotype threats, of how black males feel that because I am stereotyped, or my perception of how you view me, I perceive that you have stereotyped me. So instead of me concentrating on the academic engagement, I'm concentrating on the thought that I have of you thinking about me not being successful. And there's a whole host of other issues, disidentification, cool pose, and the list goes on and on and on. But I just wanted to bring that out to tell you that, looking at the framework and foundational to a lot of the challenges and the discussion in and around African American males, it's really important to look at the root cause a lot of this under-identification and under-representation. Very quickly, and just want to briefly share with you some of the work that I have done. A lot of it is based off of my initial studies looking at academically gifted African American males in post-secondary settings. And I have mainly been interested in how post-secondary institutions actually cultivate the gifts and talents of African American males, looking at historically black colleges and universities and predominantly white institutions. Because as we look at the gifted literature, we know that most of the literature is very much ensconced in a P-12 context. We don't really look at giftedness after those students graduate from high school and move into post-secondary settings. And we really don't look at, gifted students of color in post-secondary settings. So that was the impetus for some of my foundational work. I was mainly interested in, what were the perceptions of academically gifted African American male students we read a lot about how, for black students, black colleges are a better fit, for a host of reasons. But what does this mean, or what did it mean for the gifted student? What were these institutions doing to cultivate the giftedness and the talents of this population? Here was the research design. I just want to really show you really quickly here and tell you a little bit about what I was seeking to do. I actually identified across two different institutional contexts, one HBCU and one predominantly white institution. I used, at the time, the institution was East Texas State University. Now it's Texas A&M University of Commerce. And the HBCU was Grambling State University. And in each one of those institutional contexts, I identified a cadre of African American males. So I had 8 that I identified that met all of the criteria that I had listed to participate in the study. So 8 in the HBCU context and 6 in the PWI context. So now 14 African American males. So to participate in my study, you have to have been identified as gifted and talented in K-12, P-12. There was a certain GPA requirement that you had to have from high school, and also a current college GPA requirement of a 3.5 and above. But I will ask you this. So out of those 14 African American males, how many do you think got identified as gifted and talented in P-12? Now remember, this is a major criterion of my study. How many? 14. Now granted, to even step in the room with me, you had to at least have a 3.5 GPA in college. But how many do you think were identified as gifted and talented in P-12?
0.
0. I called my chair and I was falling apart. I was like, oh, my study. I'm never going to get my doctorate. And he was like, well, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh my gosh, all these guys, not a single one was identified as, gifted and talented in K-12, and what am I going to do? This was a major criteria. He was like, Bonner, calm yourself. He was like, wouldn't you just spend 60 pages in a literature review telling me? I said, well, African American males go unidentified, underidentified, teacher nominations are a problem, and he's like, why don't you use that? Part of qualitative research is an emergent design. He said, what a wonderful story you have to tell about these 14 guys, and not a single one was identified as gifted and talented in K-12. So the case that you see here, the case was the actual African American male that I selected. And to take this research design and do like a cut and paste or a copy and paste. So this same design in the PWI is the design I use in the HBCU. So I chose a primary case, so again, a gifted African American male. I also had him to identify for me friends, some of his friends, other African American males who fit the criteria that I was looking for. I also asked the case, could you identify for me faculty? Who are the key faculty members that have, supported you, mentored you, served as role models? Who would you identify as key faculty who have been critical in your educational experience? I also asked for a student to identify for me key administrators. Who are the administrators on campus? Some gave me like folks in multicultural affairs, students, department chairs, and it was just whoever the case study identified. And what I did, so you see ICI around case and SOI, the larger box around all of the participants. ICI stands for Informal Conversational Interview. you always, with qualitative research, want to give yourself an opportunity to go back into the field. Because I guarantee you, the moment you drive off the parking lot, out of a setting, 10 questions will come to you. I should have asked that. So the informal conversational interview just gave me an opportunity to go back and ask other questions. The SOI around everyone stands for Standardized Open-Ended Interview. For that interview, I developed a protocol that had approximately, I would say about 38 questions, 38 to 40 questions. And I asked things like, who comprises your on-campus civic support network? Who comprises your on-campus social support network? Your first day here on campus, what did you see? If you were to give advice to another academically gifted African-American male thinking of attending this institution, what would you tell him? On and on and on, to the tune of 40 questions. The thing that I think was pretty slick about this design, I actually won a dissertation award, a national award for this research. And I think what kind of set it over the top was the fact that not only did I pose these questions to the case and to the friends, I also posed that same set of questions to faculty. Now, mind you, not all the faculty were faculty of color. And the same thing with administrators. But what I asked them to do was to respond in a way that they thought an academically gifted African American male would respond. So they had to do a bit of role play. A bit of role play. With any qualitative research, you always want to triangulate your data. So I actually did, I had interviews, observations, and documents. With the observations, and I literally went native. I was there on the campus, a little bit younger then, 26-year-old, I could blend. So, I threw on my backpack and had my earbuds, and of course I had to get the clearance with everyone there on campus because all of a sudden this guy is just showing up. And so cleared it with everyone, and I actually went to class, I went to social events on campus. I was literally there from the time that they got up and they were dressed to the time they returned home. And I did this over the course of an entire academic semester. In addition to the observations, I actually collected documents. High school performance records, college performance records, award letters, academic honors, newsworthy clippings. I will tell you, call up any African-American mother and tell her, I think your son is gifted and I want to complete this dissertation study, focusing on him. You get tons of stuff. There were times when the truck was backing up and stuff was like, so I got tons and tons of stuff. But another thing I had them to do was to keep a reflective journal. So I could have prolonged and persistent engagement with them. So in the journal, I was very, very clear about, and I didn't give them designated things to write about, or I just gave them broad categories. In a typical day, what is your experience with, and it was a broad category, and they could write whatever they wanted to write. Or if they didn't have anything to write, they didn't have to write. But that gave me some really, really meaty data. And I know Julia's gonna get me some really quickly. Just to show you, I won't talk about the theoretical framework, but long story short, phenomenology was my theoretical frame because I was interested in the structure of the essence of the experiences these folks were having with this particular phenomenon, and the phenomenon being their giftedness, contextualized in an HBCU context and in a predominantly white context. What did it mean? It was case study. These were the sites just to show you how similar the institutions were in size and student-faculty ratio. Even when you look at Carnegie classification, although East Texas State was a Doctoral I institution and Grambling was a Master's I institution, but the institutions were similar from that perspective, in that Grambling offers the doctorate in two areas, in business and in education. These are the two guys, pseudonyms. And pretty similar, pretty similar. One of the neat things about these guys is that I basically lost track of them. And just as I was about to finish my book, some 10 years later, good old Facebook, and I got messages from both of them within like a week of each other saying, are you the same Fred Bonner that studied this guy? And I'm like, yeah, that's me. So, well, hey, I just want to get back in contact with you. So I was actually able to include in my book an interview it was actually 20 years later. 20 years later. No, it's 10 years later. Talking about their experiences being gifted now that they were out, graduated into the work world. This is what these were the categories or the themes. So looking across these two institutional contexts, an HBCU and a predominantly white institution, what were the themes? What were the variables that impacted or supported the academic giftedness of these two males? Or more than two, if you look at friends and those others that were included in the study. These were the factors, and I'm actually working now with another colleague trying to develop a scale that actually operationalizes these categories, and the goal is to create a model to be able to disseminate more broadly. But the first category, relationship with faculty. Having a relationship with a faculty member, PWI or HBCU, is very, very important. As a matter of fact, if you look at the literature on Black males, relationships with faculty is considered to be perhaps the most important connection to issues of retention. Peer relationships, relationships they establish with not only other African American males, but African American females, some of their white counterparts. What were those relationships and what did they mean? Family influence and support. You can't divorce the family, from the student and the student's experience. Factors influencing college selection. In my old age, I got a little bit slicker with that one. This was the dissertation brain, I would say the old guy brain. We'll probably call that one now college choice. College choice. And by that I mean, one of the things that both of those institutional contexts was able to do was to keep in that student's mind very, very present the reason why you chose this major and the reason why you elected to come to this place. So in those dark days, when it's like, I want to give up, I want to quit. But remember, you came here to get this chemistry degree because you want to go on to medical school. And that whole choice thing was very important. Self-perception. There's some really great work that Ford and Whiting have done at Vanderbilt looking at scholar identity, how they view themselves, do they view themselves as scholars? It's absolutely critical, absolutely important. And finally, that whole notion of institutional environment. What do they feel about the context? What do they feel about, driving onto the campus? How do they feel interacting and being there in the building? What is the environment? So, as I close, one thing that I absolutely want to share with you, and my chair was absolutely determined. He's like, you have to put this point out there. So one of the questions was, your first day here on campus, what did you see? Now think back to the design. Go back to the design. So remember, I had those 40 questions that I posed to, you know, the case study and the friends. But remember, I also posed those same questions to faculty and administrators. So on the HBCU campus, the case study said, I saw other black people, I saw a band, I saw black faculty, I thought about Denise Huxtable going to Hillman College. So I thought my experience was gonna be just as great coming to Grambling, so it was wonderful. And then when I asked the faculty and administrators there, they said things like, I saw other black students, you know, I had a sense of pride, I have this long-standing family tradition in black colleges, and I knew I chose the right place, and I was just so excited about being here. Well, pretty congruent, pretty congruent. On the predominantly white campus, the faculty and administrators said things like, I chose East Texas State University because I wanted a rewarding educational experience, and I know this is going to be 4 years of an educational odyssey, and I am so glad to be here in Commerce, Texas, because East Texas State is a great place. The case study said, I saw white folks, and I was afraid. Chilling, telling. Now granted, this is not a student who barely got into East Texas State. This is a gifted student, one of your best and brightest, saying that I saw, you know, a lot of people who didn't look like me, and I was afraid. Not only is that telling, but also think about, what about that student who did just barely get in? And what about his experience? You know, I tell the higher ed people all the time that, you know, you can't just study higher ed. You have to also look at the K-12 stuff. You know, you have to understand, you know, things about, you know, learner-centered environments and creating contexts where students feel comfortable